Now let's look at the rhabdoviruses, quite possibly one of my favorite diseases. Okay, the virus itself is bullet-shaped, and we showed you that, and the specific virus that we're going to focus on is rabies virus. Now, you have to be aware that the reservoir in the U.S. is not dogs, all right? So if you're reading a vignette and somebody was bitten by a dog, are you going to go crazy and think that they have rabies? Not if it was in the U.S., but worldwide, dogs are the primary reservoir. In the U.S., raccoons, bats, skunks, and foxes are the primary reservoir, with raccoons being number one. And what's a big clue that a raccoon may be rabid? Well, remember, raccoons are nocturnal. So if you see a raccoon trailing around in the middle of the day looking for food, there's probably something wrong, okay? Because raccoons usually only come out at night. Again, transmission is usually bite or contact with a rabid animal. Most patients remember that, so that's going to help with the diagnosis. Now, pathogenesis for rabies, you get the bite from the animal, and you can have some local replication in the muscle before the virus finds its way to the acetylcholine receptor and begins to travel by retrograde axoplasmic transport to the dorsal root ganglia, then the spinal cord, and then the brain. Okay? Now, you've probably heard somewhere along the line that the closer you are bitten to the face or the brain, the more quickly you can develop rabies. That's true, okay? Just think, if you're riding your bike and you're bitten by one of those little ankle-biting dogs that can actually catch up with you, which means really you should be riding your bike faster, but you're riding your bike, you get bitten by an ankle biter, that was rabid, okay? So think, it has to replicate in the local muscle, then it has to get into the nerves by the acetylcholine receptor, the dorsal root ganglia, all the way up the spinal cord, and eventually to the brain. Now, let's say you're out on a walk and you see this really nasty dog, and it's frothing and drooling and foaming at the mouth, and you say, "Here, Cujo, Cujo," and he bites you right on the face. Yes, then you are going to develop rabies, clinical rabies, much, much quicker. Okay, what is the disease that we call rabies? Initially, we're going to get kind of a flu-like illness. And once you start seeing signs that the virus is in the CNS, read my lips, is 100% fatal, okay? It's always fatal when it hits the CNS. Now, some of the symptoms they're kind of fun, hallucinate. I mean, if you got to go, why not hallucinate, right? So hallucination, hydrophobia, how fun is this? Do you want some water? No water. They get really angry at the thought of having to drink water. Why? Because it hurts them so much to swallow. So hydrophobia, hallucination, disorientation, which precedes coma and death. Okay, remember, once it gets into the CNS, it's 100% fatal. Okay? How are you going to diagnose rabies? Usually, unfortunately, post-mortem. And what you're going to look for are Negri bodies and infected neurons, which are sites of what? Viral assembly. Okay? You can also do fluorescent antibody and PCR, but again, it's usually post-mortem. As far as treatment for rabies, once you start seeing those symptoms and you offer somebody water and they smack it out of your hand, you're pretty much going to just try to make them comfortable, okay? But if you're bitten by a raccoon midday, this is one of the only diseases that we vaccinate post-exposure for, okay? So you get bitten by a raccoon in the middle of the day, and you're going to wash the wound. Remember, it's an envelope virus, but probably what you're not going to be able to do, if it's a puncture wound, is get deep down into the tissue with that detergent, okay? So what you're going to have to do, you go to the physician, you get a dose of human rabies immunoglobulin. What that's going to do is it's going to bind up any of the virus that's in there and hopefully take it to a macrophage or another cell to destroy. Now, what they'll typically do is give you one dose, a half of that human rabies immune globulin in the bite itself, and then the other half kind of on the other side of the body. So now what we're trying to do is coat all of the rabies with antibodies to, in effect, neutralize the virus. We will then give 5 doses of rabies vaccine the day you come in, 3 days later, 7 days later, 14 days later, and 28 days later. Now, it's not in the stomach or the eyeball or anything horrible like that, but we do have to give several doses of the vaccine, and what we're trying to do here is really make the immune system mad. You're jabbing, 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 all of a sudden the immune system's like, whoa, what is all this stuff? And you get an overwhelming, hopefully, immune response to rabies. So, whichever, if any virus escaped the human rabies immune globulin, now the immune system is ready to attack it before it gets to the CNS, okay? And it's important to know that the rabies vaccine is a killed virus vaccine. Okay, prevention, again, vaccination, and in the U.S. we vaccinate domestic animals, all right? It's actually against the law to have a domestic animal that has not been vaccinated for rabies virus. So that's one of the biggest means by which we prevent rabies in the U.S.